Bernie Beck's back with Better Life Television and a show called Journeys and Journals. The reason is because it takes first-person stories and puts them down. Not only stories that you can keep for your kids and for the museum or for the library. Marilyn has been telling me stories, and this is not the first time I've listened like a kid, you know. You remember what it was like to listen to stories. Today some stories came up about early Indians, and I didn't know anything about that. I said, Marilyn, would you please tell me, how do you know these stories? What is it?
Well, about the brother Jonathan?
About the Indian maiden.
Yeah, well, that I knew her for a long time. She worked as a maid eventually, but she married my dad's half-brother, and
their names are?
Her name was Minnie, and Archie Macumber was my uncle.
Okay, Archie married Minnie, and what is Minnie's history?
I didn't know until after she had passed away that she was a princess in the Requa tribe, just below Crescent City.
Okay, now what town would that be? Where were the Requa Indians?
Well, that's where they were, just down below Klamath, not as far as Eureka, but in that area.
Because Klamath has quite a history of First Nation people or Indians, whatever the term is nowadays.
Well, and they were very much so. But I did get to listen one time to an interesting debate. Some of the people that study older people's languages and things, with Minnie and about half a dozen of her friends and relatives, these young women were asking questions about different words, and those women just laughed, and they told her how many words it took to make rain, different kinds of rain. Whatever word they said, you knew what kind of rain it was.
Okay, so what are some kinds of rains that, I know you probably don't remember the Indian word, but let's say there'd be
heavy rain, light rain, drizzle, slanting wind and all that. But they had different words for all of that. Many that I knew had the tribal mark. We used to call them 111s, because there was 3 tattoo marks on their chins.
And that was an honor?
Well, that was proof of who they were. So they all had that.
Sort of like women wear a wedding ring, that's a proof that they're married.
I don't know whether it is or not, but that was just, they belonged to that tribe. And that's what it was.
Now, so you knew several of these women, at least casually, to
quite a lot of them. I did go to school with a couple of young Indian girls, and I helped them gather berry shoots in the spring. Blackberry shoots, when they're first coming up, when they're about a foot high, you break them off and skin the spines off of them. They're just like candy.
Do you mean I could try that this spring?
You sure could.
I've had so many blackberry spines in my fingers because I'm an expert blackberry picker. We used to pick them and sell them to the bakery, McCoy's Bakery.
I found an interesting thing to help you pick blackberries. My first husband was a lineman, electric lineman, and when the gloves quit being useful for that, if they had maybe a little hole, they were wonderful. I'd put one on one hand. You can hold the vines. They don't pierce that. So you can grab the vine and hold it over and just pick with one hand without getting stuck.
Well, my favorite way is you get a big wide board, well, let's say a 10-inch board, and you carry it over and you drop it right in the middle of the berry patch, and then you climb up and pick those big juicy berries right in the middle. And we used to take those to the store, to the bakery.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd buy them. We were such enterprising young people.
I loved the way the Indians picked their huckleberries, too.
How's that?
You know how we pick carefully one at a time. They just scrape them all off in a big bucket. Then they have their kids on one side, both sides of a blanket, and make a big V. Dump the bucket in here, the berries run out the other end, and the leaves and debris stick to the blanket. They shake it off and do it again.
Oh my goodness, I never heard of such a thing.
And it worked.
Now, I know that there were Indians that, at Smith River, or River's End, where Uncle Bill and Aunt Mary Fisher lived, and which is now a casino, the Indian school.
Oh, yeah.
And they would come and sell these exquisite pickings, the most beautiful berries, the most beautiful.
Oh, yes.
They'd have thick cream. I don't know where she'd get it, but it was like what we'd buy, the British Devonshire cream or something.
Yeah.
And this little community right there at River's End, it was a wonderful thing for me to be introduced to that culture of. They lived in the Indian
yes.
school. That was their home.
That's right, and they knew how to work with things. I loved the salmon berries.
Tell me about salmon berries. I know nothing about what you do with them.
Well, they have pink blossoms, and the fruit is kind of yellow. And it's not quite as sweet as a blackberry, but I liked them very much. And they grow on the coast. Such a pretty little flower, kind of a little purple blossom.
Well, now getting back to this south of Crescent City, did you go down that way very often? What did you do down there?
My mother's sister lived in Eureka, and very rarely we traveled that way. But I do remember one terrible night coming back home late at night. The man that was driving the car, it was a big car, it was dark and we had to have all lights out. So,
You're talking wartime.
yes.
Okay.
Somebody had to go ahead of the car to feel the road and tap on the fender, come ahead so many feet for I don't know how many miles. Felt like forever. Because if you didn't know just where the edge of the road was, you could go bloop, way off, get
Into
kind
the
of wet in a hurry.
Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
Now, this was hardship to live there.
Well, they may have been hardships, but that was just life at the time.
Can you tell me more about wartime and being there?
Well, it was very, very real. We were very aware of it because we knew that they could come in there and we could be hurt. And there were lots of sightings of ships out close by and flashing lights signaling somebody on shore often. And we had to learn to see what there's some bright lights that are there on the ocean anyhow. We had to know the difference between a light and the fluorescence. But everybody learned pretty quick.
Now, was this taught in your school or taught at your mother's knee or
Just kind of everywhere, I guess.
newspaper?
I imagine so. We got the Del Norte Triplicate, was very active all that time, and Humboldt Times from Eureka. So they covered that whole area.
And we had a guest on from who was just north of Gold Beach, and there was a real scare that they were coming ashore there.
And they very well could have. So it just, the whole coastline, they wanted to get a foothold in the United States. And they were obviously checking out every little nook and cranny. So.
Well, as young as I was then, maybe 4, 5, 6, I still have vivid memories of.
Well, I do remember one wealthy lady from some city south in California came up to Crescent City to get away from the awful cities, talk of war, and she was walking her dog out on the beach south of Crescent City, and somebody came, tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Ma'am, we'd rather you weren't out here," because the whole hillside was full of armaments and soldiers and things up there. She picked up her doggie and went back to the big city. there were a lot of tales like that we knew, and we were ready for whatever happened. But it just...
Well, did you have stockpiles of food, or did you have candles, or, I mean, how did you prepare for such a...
As well as we could, but we always had garden that we could dig. There was always root crops that were left there, and we always raised chickens and maybe rabbits, and there was something like that available.
So you weren't going to be in total isolation or totally dependent on the outside world?
No, didn't have to be.
Mom and Dad saw to it, and they trained how many kids in your family?
It was just my sister and I. She was 5 years older than I am. And while we weren't very close, we suffered the same things in school. And of course, she was a secretarial type, and she loved all of that kind of stuff. Not me. I was a tomboy. And I climbed around on the hillsides and got into some rather dangerous spots, actually, but I wasn't aware of how dangerous it was until I thought about it years later. That was kind of stupid, and it was. But I know God was with me then, even when I wasn't asking Him to help me.
Well, on the Smith River, those gorgeous redwoods in there, but what else about the Smith River?
It was a long ways across it, one of the places we called Walker's Hole. That was off the North Bank Road, and it was very deep out there, and that was one of the bet you can't swim clear across deals for some of them. I never did, because I was not that good. But that is where I learned one thing. While it sounded so nice to sing praise choruses, looking up at the stars, you don't sing looking up, it doesn't work. Oh, but that was funny.
Absolutely, because this is all part of, tell me about some of the other kids in your class and how did they cope?
Well, about as well as they could. Some of us liked to ride our bicycles, and we would ride out to Smith River, or, well, to where that forked off, and then ride across North Bank Road, then come back 101 up Hyuchi Hill. I rode up both sides of that hill. I didn't walk my bicycle, I rode. And I put my foot down on that pedal, that bicycle went forward. The only drawback was I had to wait at the top for my pals to get up. They had to get out and push.
Because this was part of life. I mean, bicycling.
It was fun. But one of what I said is very dangerous. We would listen, at that time there was a 4-mile straight stretch. It didn't have broken the way it is now. But we'd listen from the top of the hill, and if we couldn't hear any heavy traffic coming, we'd turn loose at the top and fly down there. If we'd hit a pebble, they'd still be scraping us off of the redwood bark.
Now, last time...
But when we hit the bottom, we didn't even have to touch a pedal until we were almost to Crescent City. It was a good 3 miles that we just kept flying.
Well, last time I was on a bike, I wondered, can you still sit on the seat and have your feet just kind of doing this when you're going down a hill? I had forgotten how freeing that was.
Oh, yeah.
I never mastered riding with my hands folded over my chest like the big boys would.
Oh, well, we just took our feet off the pedals and let them fly.
Yep.
But I could beat anybody in town except one boy, and he had a racing sprocket. So I figured if I couldn't beat him, he couldn't beat me. My bicycling was better than his.
Oh boy, that's another goody point for you.
Our bicycle, my sister and I shared, it was just a put together from old parts that my dad put together. Didn't look very flashy, but boy, it took miles.
Oh, great. Now, you had other favorite toys, or not many?
Well, we played a lot of games, board games and things, and even tiddlywinks and things, which nobody does now. And
I kind of feel sorry for kids that grow up with only those computer
Well, yes.
zapper things, and their thumbs get educated, but man.
Roller skates, I was never good with roller skates.
How about marbles?
Yeah, I got pretty good with that. But I saved popsicle coupons. I rummaged in everybody's garbage bags and begged for any, and I bought with those a whole shoebox full of those coupons, and I got a beautiful pair of roller skates. And the only place we had to do any skating was an old tennis rink. Tennis court had cracks in the cement. And my knees finally protested and said, "Don't do that again, stupid." So one of the neighbor boys wanted to borrow my skates again. He'd done it several times. And I said, "You can borrow them under one condition. Don't ever bring them back." So he got the skates.
Now, were roads paved over there as you grew up? I mean, was 101 a paved road, or 199, or?
Well, it was then. My dad helped work on that.
Oh.
But I'm sure that when I was just a little kid, there probably weren't any. When my folks went over there first time, it was over the rough road out through Lone Corral or Lone Mountain or someplace out in there. It's still passable, but not very much.
Well, when you talked before about Corduroy Road, would that have been off of the main drag,
Yeah.
some little back road, or
Usually, yeah.
were those the old highways?
Well, on that old one that went out through Bertolito, there was a section of that still had that. But it could be anywhere.
Now, the corduroy, as I understand it, was just a way to get up out of the mud.
Yeah,
Keep your tires from sinking in.
that's right. But you could see them. The logs didn't sink clear out of sight, but you could see the little ripples.
Bump, 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 bump.
Oh, yeah. But the old Model Ts and Model As, they didn't go very fast anyway. Of course, there were still horses and buggies that went over there.
You remember seeing horses and buggies?
Yeah, I did get to meet one of the Pony Express riders that took his wagon over to Crescent City.
From where?
Huh?
From where did he go to where?
Well, I think from Grants Pass over to Crescent City and then back again.
Do you know his name, or how did you happen to get to meet the guy?
I think the last name was Woolley, but I don't know for sure. I just knew who he was when I saw him. But traffic was not good. When my mother wanted to go to high school, she had to come into Grants Pass and board with people because there was no high school out there. And she was so determined to go to be a teacher, she came in and worked for her board and room, graduated from high school, and then went up to Multnomah to college and became a teacher.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I wish she had talked more about it, because she had to go to Gold Beach and come up the river on a boat to a little town that she taught for quite a while. And it was really pioneer stuff, but she didn't like it. And her sister tells me the children just loved her, but she never was terribly fond of little children. And when she found out that's what it was all about, kind of wasn't quite so interesting to her.
So she, even at their own kids, she was happy when you got up to be big enough to...
Oh, yeah. Well, we always had lots of books, lots of everything. She taught my sister how to cook, but not me. Someday I would, when I'm big enough. Unfortunately, my sister married and left before I gave my mother the mumps. I was so generous. My Spanish teacher, I kind of thought something wasn't quite right, but I had long hair and I left it so it didn't show. I guess I carried mumps to everybody that knew me.
Well, I gave...
And my mother got real sick in bed, and I couldn't cook anything, but I knew how to open a can of tomato soup and heat it up. Those horrible plastic straws were just coming in, the ones that bent, kind of. And I could pour that soup in a pitcher that had a handle and take it into her, and she'd suck it out of that straw. After about a week of that, she came out one morning, and she was tired of that. So she put a couple of pieces of bread in the toaster, put on a little pot of coffee, and she was going to have some breakfast. Well, she poured the coffee, put the toast out there and buttered it, took one big crunch, took another sip of coffee, took a little nibble, a couple more nibbles, and she put it down, went back to bed, and had tomato soup for another day or two.
Oh, she was a sick lady.
Yes, she was. And it was my husband's sister, although she wasn't my sister-in-law then, that I dropped by to see her, and I gave her the mumps.
Oh, you were so
Oh,
jealous.
I was so good. But then I went to visit her after she got them and was real bad. But she wrapped a cloth around her. She looked like an old toothache ad, because her cheeks were all puffy. You could just see the little teeth in front with this big towel around her.
So that's the way they used to do things,
Oh,
huh?
yeah.
Yeah, I gave the mumps to my father and my brother and who knows who all else. I just was generous too.
Oh, they should have given me a commission for spreading the mumps.
What was medical attention like in Crescent City
Well,
when you grew up?
There was pretty good medical attention. The doctor that delivered me was Ernest Fine, the one they named the bridge for there by Smith River. And he's one that set my arm one time too, because my dad had a barrel and a wheelbarrow and he was playing horsey with me, and it threw me off, and I caught myself there and just bent my arm. And the doctor said, "This might hurt," and he bent it back. And for years I had little loose chips in my elbow that crackled when I moved, but then I had a steel brace with a hammer handle on it, and that was fun.
Okay. You're a little bit more a tomboy than I
Oh,
thought.
I was definitely. And I knew if I climbed up a willow tree real fast, I could hang on to the top while it bent over and I could drop off on the ground.
Now that sounds like a lot of fun. You have so many stories. Could you share one more about Indian maidens and your aunt? How in the world did your uncle get to marrying her? I mean,
Well, he had met her sometime before, I guess. Anyhow, they were very close friends for a long time. In fact, we went home from Cave Junction one day, and my uncle was in my mother's bed with Minnie, and they were not married yet. And my mother, to say the least, was displeased extremely.
I understand that you kind of surprised Uncle.
But I got to know her a little better. She was a maid in San Francisco, and Archie would come on shore, and he'd pick me up and take me over to Chinatown, and we'd have dinner together, and that was interesting. He always sent birthday presents from the Orient. I was sure to get one on my sister's birthday, and she got one on mine. He never got the dates straight.
Okay, or which we were called sis by some people because they couldn't quite remember which one was Bernie and which one was Sharon.
Yeah.
Now, your dad was at sea most of your growing up years?
Was what?
He was a sailor, or your uncle was the sailor all your
My uncle was, but my dad took a trip to China on a boat, I think 1918 or something like that. So he had some experience with it.
Now, was he a deckhand, or was he?
I don't know. I imagine he worked his way over and back. Money was not plentiful. And then he sold De La Val milking machines for a long time, and he had what he called Al's Sharp Shop. He sharpened lawnmowers and scissors and everything.
And he was the Al of Al Sharp Shop.
Yep,
And that was in Crescent City also.
yep.
I just thank you so much for telling these stories. Who else would know them? Who else would?
Well, I don't know. My sister's gone, and I don't know.
Probably most of your playmates are gone too.
No, I don't know that she did. She wasn't a tomboy.
But you had a bunch
She
of...
was a good helper. Dusted the furniture while I fed the rabbits. The only thing, my dad made us one of those rubber guns, you know, where they used to have inner tubes that you could cut rings off of.
Yes.
And put it on there and you pull the trigger and it would shoot it. Well, we had a lot of fun shooting each other, but we kept losing our rubber bands. And I think it was a red tube that he'd cut up. One day, my mother said that old rooster looks awful sick, but his pot was so full, he couldn't eat. So she brought him in, chloroformed him, and cut it open, and took all of our rubber bands out of his crop. And we were not allowed to play in that part of the yard anymore.
Thank goodness for the surgery that was
But the rooster got all right.
none the worse for wear.
But I'll bet he was sure careful what he ate.
Yeah, we didn't digest those very well. You've got one more story, and I am so pleased that you've come and shared so much of your family history with us. These times, maybe while you were being a tomboy, you were also keeping your ear to the ground for stories. Is that right?
Keeping what?
You were listening for the stories the big kids were telling, and
Well, I guess I was one of the big kids. I developed some talents that weren't really the nicest. I learned how to shoplift and pickpockets and do all kinds of nice things like that.
Here on Better Life TV, you confess to me, your friend.
Yes, I confess that I did things like that. And it's not something I advise for anything, and I always knew what to expect from my kids, and I was a jump ahead of them, so they never did things like that.
If anyone got their pocket picked by this lady, contact us and we'll see that you get it back. Oh my goodness, I just learned so much about you today, and I want to thank you very much for being my friend and for being a supporter, a strong supporter of Better Life Television.
Oh, absolutely.
She invited me out to her place out in the valley, and
That's still there. My cat still lives in the house.
Oh, goody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and we've had fun telling and retelling these stories.